Just a reminder to vote in this week's Locals poll, where you decide what deck I take to Locals every single week. Without any further ado, I hope you enjoyed the video. What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to the channel, and today we have the deck profile for the deck we took to Locals last night, being Amorphage. Unfortunately, we did not win any of our matches. It was kind of rough. For the most part, even when we won the die roll, because we actually won most of our die rolls, we either had no monsters in hand or all of the same scale, so we couldn't pendulum summon. But it is what it is. I knew it wouldn't do that good, but I didn't think it would do as bad as it did. But, yeah. Without any further ado, we'll just do a quick look to what it looks like on paper, then we'll get to the card by card. Okay, so starting with the monsters, we're going to go to our level 8s, being 3 copies of Amorphage Goliath, as well as 2 copies of Amorphactor Pain, the Imagination Drake Overlord. So the way I built this deck is to try to discard and draw as much as possible with things like trade-in and card destruction in order to not only set up my graveyard to reborn this guy during my opponent's standby phase, but also so I can just draw cards, fix my hand, so then I can get the ideal scales. So it's like a draw, discard, Amorphage deck. So yeah, this is your main guy. And then all of their pendulum effects have Floodgate-esque effects as well. So he's Macrocosmos while you control another Amorphage monster, and while he's on the field, he locks your opponent out of the extra deck. Sloth does the same thing, only it's for 1 tribute instead of 2. And while he's in the scale, he becomes Mistake. So no searching. Next, 3 copies of Amorphage Pride. This is going to be one of the main ones that you actually pendulum summon. So, like I said, while he's pendulum summoned, he locks your opponent out of the extra deck, and then while he's in the scale, he protects against burn damage. But he's a level 4 with 1750, so he's going to be one of the main ones that you pendulum summon. Next, 2 copies of Amorphage Wrath. So while Wrath is in the scale, he prevents tributing, and then, of course, just like Pride, when he is pendulum summoned, no extra deck for your opponent. I mean, technically you're also locked out of the extra deck, but you're not going to be summoning from the extra deck with this deck anyway, so, you know, it's whatever. Next, 1 copy of Amorphage Greed, and 2 copies of Amorphage Envy. These are your high defenders. So they all, of course, have the pendulum summon effect, and then while they're in the scale, Greed prevents trap cards and effects from being activated, and Envy prevents things from being activated as Chain Link 2 or higher. Next is 1 copy of Amorphage Lechery, and 2 copies of Amorphage Gluttony. So these are some of your more powerful pendulum scale effects. So while Lechery's in the pendulum scale, as long as you control another Amorphage monster, your opponent can't activate spell cards or effects. And then while Gluttony is in the pendulum scale, it's the same thing as Lechery, except they can't activate monster effects. Okay, and that's anywhere. In the hand, the graveyard, banish zone, anywhere. As long as you control another Amorphage monster, no monster effects. Alright, and then next, to wrap up the monsters and start the spells, I decided to include this all at once, is what I call the Draco Slayer package. And I included this because I was looking for a way to make this deck a little better, a little more consistent. And I found these guys, and as it turns out, they're actually connected to the lore behind Amorphage, so I decided to include them. So we have 2 Master Pendulum, the Draco Slayer, 2 Lector Pendulum, the Draco Slayer, and 3 Draco Face-Off. So basically the tie-in with the lore is that Lector Pendulum eventually morphs into Amorphage Goliath. So that's kind of cool. I mean, you see how they have like the same wings right there? They look very, very similar. So yeah, basically he turns into Amorphage Goliath eventually during his battle with Master Pendulum. But so basically with Draco Face-Off, what you do is you reveal one of each of these guys from your deck. Your opponent randomly chooses one, and then whichever one they choose, you get a choice to either special summon it or put it in your Pendulum Scale, and then the other one goes face up to the extra deck. And another reason why I included these is because all of the Amorphage Pendulum effects have a maintenance cost during your standby phase where you have to tribute a monster or it gets destroyed. So I figured it'd be a way to get a Pendulum Scale out of the deck, and it would be one that doesn't have to tribute during the standby phase. So instead of having to do tribute 2 monsters during each standby phase, I can only tribute 1. And like I said, it also ties in with the lore, so that's actually kind of cool. So yeah, that's the Draco Slayer package. Next, going into the rest of the spells, we have my draw package, 3 copies of Trade-In for our level 8s, 3 copies of Super Rejuvenation, because we're tributing and discarding all the time, 2 copies of Amorphous Persona, which is the field spell, basically up to twice per turn. Whenever an Amorphage monster gets tributed, you get to immediately draw a card. And then 1 card destruction as well. So yeah, Trade-In and card destruction are going to be your main draw powerhouses to help with Super Rejuvenation. So that way you can get more resources during the end phase. And then Persona is just for extra power. And then you can actually kind of see in the artwork here, you have Master and Lecter. And Lecter is, of course, going to incorporate that little virus thing into him and become Amorphage Goliath. So yeah, this is the draw. These are all the draw cards. And, I mean, when you have, like, the right combination in your hand, it works really well. The problem is you just don't get that as often as I had hoped. To finish out the spells, 1 Monster Reborn, because, like I said, you're discarding a bunch, so you can just Reborn Goliath. And then 3 copies of Amorphage Infection to round out the spell. It gives your Amorphage monsters 100 attack and defense for every Amorphage card on the field, including itself. So you can pump them up big to where your opponent can't beat over it. Next, moving on to the trap cards, is 2 copies of Pendulum Reborn and Amorphage Lysis. So Pendulum Reborn is basically Monster Reborn, but for pendulums, as the name suggests. But it's actually non-targeting, and you can special summon 1 from your extra deck or from your graveyard. So this just provides more flexibility with getting Goliath back on your opponent's turn. You can also get something like Sloth. Then Amorphage Lysis. It's actually the exact opposite of Amorphage Infection, where instead of your monsters gaining 100 attack for every Amorphage card on the field, your opponent's monsters lose 100 attack for every Amorphage card on the field. And then it does also have an effect where if a card in your Pendulum Scale gets blown up, you can immediately replace it. And I did forget to mention with Infection that when an Amorphage is either tributed or destroyed, you get a Surge. So I did forget to mention that. But this was the deck that we took. I don't know. I'm thinking about possibly retiring this deck until we get more support, or before that I may try to do a couple other combinations of cards where, like, maybe instead of discarding as much, I dump it to the graveyard. Maybe things like Hand Destruction and Dragon Shrine to try to get him into the graveyard, and then that way so I can get to my Reborn cards better. You know, things like our Monster Reborn. And our Pendulum Reborn, might bump this up to 3 in order to increase the chances of seeing it. So, I don't know, just some things to consider. I might piddle around with it, but that'll be for a later day. So in the meantime, like, subscribe, vote in the locals poll, all that good stuff. And I'll see you guys later.